Last week we started a brand new sermon series called Turning Houses into Homes, and we looked at the home as a filling station. Today we're looking at the home as a training center. All right, last week it was a filling station, today's a training center. God, thank you so much for this time together. I thank you, Lord, for the worship of this day, because that's about you. Lord, I pray that our lives and our hearts and our minds and our souls would be yours. And that, Lord, as that takes place, as we sit at your feet on this day, that we would hear your voice. And so give us ears to hear and minds to conceive and hearts to receive the word that you have specifically for us on this day. And all God's people said. Recently, I've been kind of playing the role of the roaming reporter. I've been going around and I've been talking to various people and I've been gathering information. I've been asking questions like, what did you perceive to be the dominant values in your family growing up? What were the dominant values in your family growing up? In other words, when I ask the question, I would also ask this in hindsight: what messages or convictions were communicated to you time and time and time again in your home? And of course, the answers were varied and sometimes very surprising, but let me give you just a little sampling of them. Several people said, in my family, one dominant family value was to give 100%. 100% to do whatever you do. And so, whatever you do, do your best. Others said that family, the importance of family time and care and love and support was a dominant value in their home. Sadly, I had a couple of people actually tell me that the dominant value in their family was the nothing's never good enough value. That no matter what they did or how well they did it, it was never good enough. On the other side of the coin, I had a couple people tell me that the dominant value in their family was the pursuit of dreams. That they were literally encouraged time and time again to dream the impossible dream, to reach for the unreachable stars. In other words, to dream and to dream big. Still others said the dominant value in their family was the spiritual value. The spiritual value of developing and nurturing an intimate, passionate, and growing relationship with God through Jesus Christ. Friends, literally, I could go on and on and on. But hear this. Everybody I ask said something. They all said something, which of course should be no surprise to you and me. I mean, think about it. If you and I actually live in a family for like 20 years, it's almost inconceivable that there aren't certain ideas and themes and values that have been raised to the top as being important in your family, right? And so let me ask you, what were the dominant themes and values in your family growing up? What were they? We all had them, right? What were yours? In my family, two of the dominant themes that were there were, number one, be who God designed you to be and do what God designed you to do. In other words, don't let other people pressure you into doing and being something you're not. You see, as a PK, a preacher's kid, my mom and dad knew that there would be all kinds of people who would have wonderful plans for us kids' lives. And they'd be putting all kinds of pressure on us kids to act in certain ways and to be and do certain things. And my parents were smart enough to know that, first of all, we are all ultimately accountable to God for who we are and for what we do. We're all ultimately accountable to God for who we are and what we do. And secondly, if we kids were ever going to have a chance, not saying that we did, but ever have a chance to grow up to be healthy, well-adjusted adults, then we couldn't be ping pong balls that were being bounced back and forth between other people's opinions. No, if there was any chance for us to become healthy, well-adjusted adults, then we needed to stay focused on how God designed us to be and what God designed us to do. And so verbally, my parents reinforced that over and over and over again. But honestly, I think I heard that message most clearly whenever I played basketball with my dad. You see, I don't care where we lived. It could be a small town, or it could be a huge city. But my dad quickly became known as one of the most physically aggressive basketball players in that entire area. I could literally tell you story after story after stories of guys who could not believe that that guy was a pastor. Let me just share one of them. My brother-in-law, Chris, is a big guy. When he was in college, he was an offensive lineman, and a while back we were talking. And he said, Derik, you know, when we first started playing basketball together, when I first started playing basketball with your dad, remember back when Sherry and I were dating? I said, yeah. He said, I thought he hated me. I mean, he was pushing and shoving and elbowing, and he was intense. And I said, I know, that's the way he played, but don't let that fool you. He did hate you. I said, no, he didn't. He said, I know, because I looked around and he was doing it to everybody else. Friends, there are some who truly do believe that athletically a man of God ought to be a wimp. But I'm telling you, my dad believed the man of God ought to be the hardest worker on the court, and if he had to knock you to the ground, to the court to prove it, he would. That was who he was. Friends, my parents taught me in some good ways and in some not so very good ways to be who God designed me to be and do what God designed me to do. That's partly why I'm doing what I'm doing today, because I believe this is who I'm created to be, and this is what I believe I'm created to do. The second value that I want to share with you that my mom and dad taught us that was extremely important, that ties right into the first one, is that ultimately loving and serving God is all that really matters in life. Ultimately, loving and serving God is all that really matters in life. Friends, here there's both my mom and my dad, and each of us 6 kids pretty much adopted that value. When it's all said and done, knowing Jesus Christ and relating to him personally and passionately and serving him and others is ultimately all that really matters in life. That's why a number of years ago, when my 20-something sister, at that time single sister, was called by God to go to Liberia, Africa on the mission field all by herself. As a 20-something-year-old woman, hear this, my mom and dad did not fight her. They did not try to guilt trip her into staying. No, in spite of the fact they had concerns about their 20-something-year-old single daughter going to Africa alone. They had concerns, but they stood behind her and they supported her because they knew ultimately, loving and serving God is all that really matters. Now, friends, there were many other values in my family, some good and some bad. But again, I want to point out that the home, hear this, the home, your home and my home is a training center. And whether you and I realize it or not, the values that we teach our family intentionally and unintentionally are going to be placed in their lives. Which brings us to this probing question. What are the dominant themes and values being taught in your family right now? Grandparents, this applies to you too. What are they? Friends, your home and my home is a training center. And so what are you teaching one another intentionally and unintentionally right now in your home? Now, with that thought in mind, I want to give you a challenge. Choose. Choose to be intentional. Choose to be intentional about selecting the values that are going to dominate in your home from this point forward. And then beyond that, I want to challenge you to choose to communicate and teach and model those values with a passion. Now, to help you do that, I want to suggest 4 values for you to ponder. 4 values that I hope are contenders. They don't have to be, but I hope are contenders for your family value list. Number 1, this one's probably not going to come as any surprise. It's the value of knowing and loving Jesus Christ in a personal and passionate way and serving others in his name. In other words, it's to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. It is a spiritual value. Now, please notice what I did not say. I did not say that the first major value in your life and mine ought to be to train our family members to be religious. I did not say that you and I should train our family members to be good church members, or even to train our family members to buy a Bible and say an occasional prayer. To be honest, those kind of values wouldn't make my top 50 list. let alone my top 10. But the value of knowing and loving Jesus Christ in a personal and passionate way and serving others in his name, that one goes all the way to the top. You see, I know from God's word and I know from personal experience that until and unless, hear this, until and unless every member of my family knows and loves Jesus Christ personally and passionately, and they live it out by serving others, unless and until that happens, they are going to be living beneath their privilege. Beneath their privilege. Because they're going to be living without the sense of completeness and companionship that God alone provides. They're going to be living without a sense of security that God alone provides. They're going to be living without a divine guidance in a very confusing world. They're going to be living without a sense of purpose that only comes in connection to God and serving others in his name. They're going to be living without the inner strength that only God alone can provide in the storms of life. And they're going to be living without the sense of completeness and wholeness and of life that passes all understanding that only Emmanuel, the name for God with us, can give. Friends, I don't know about you, but I don't want my family living without those things. That's why for the last 38 years, every Saturday, I have fasted and prayed for my kids, which include my son-in-laws, the sons of my heart, and my grandkids and all the Hineses to come from this day to Christ's return. I have fasted and prayed that first and foremost, they would have a passion and a desire to love God, and that they would love him and serve with everything they have. Now hear this, along the way, sure, there have been times I prayed for safety, I prayed for health, etc., but hear this, my first prayer, my number one prayer, the prayer that I have lifted up and I prayed again for 38 years, is that my kids and my grandkids and all the Hineses to come would have a living relationship with Jesus Christ that brings a completeness and a companionship, a security and a love, a peace and a purpose, a direction and a passion that comes from nowhere else. Nowhere else. Also, I've come to realize, hear this, that if Jesus, not Christ, is not preeminent, if he is not supreme, if he is not first and foremost in each and every one of their lives, then someone or something else is. Someone or something else is. And so whatever that is, it may be power or money or fame or fortune or pleasure, whatever that something else is, it will diminish. It will diminish the quality and the potential for life in my family member. And friends, that would torture me. It would be pure torture to me to see that day in and day out. Unfortunately, some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, putting all that in a positive light, if each and every one of my family members are in a genuine, growing, loving relationship with God through Jesus Christ, and if Jesus Christ truly is first and foremost in their life, then the outgrowth, the overflow of that loving relationship is going to spill out into the lives of every one of my family members. And not only will it spill out and bless my family members, but it's going to spill out into the lives of all of those around them, and it's going to spill out in the lives of all those around them, and then it's going to spill out in the lives of all those around them. Friends, a family, hear this, a family that can truly worship together and share God's love together and serve others together and find God's purpose and passion together, that is a blessed family. And hear me, that family will bless the world. That family will bless the world. I don't know about you, but that's what I want for my family. I want them to bless the world. How about you? What do you want for your family? The Apostle Paul says in Ephesians 6:4, whatever you parents do, whatever you do, make it a priority to lead every one of your children into a genuine, passionate relationship with Jesus Christ. And then he says, train them and instruct them. Why? To nurture their relationship so that they can grow and overflow with that relationship into every area of their life. Now let me ask you, is that an intentional, dominant, written out value in your family? That all of you would have a deep, loving, passionate relationship with Jesus Christ that would work its way out in serving others in his name? Is that a dominant, spelled out family value? Is it? If not, I think it warrants some strong consideration about becoming one. The second value I'd like to suggest for our family, your family's dominant family value list, is the value of building, nurturing, and rebuilding significant relationships. You see, friends, on many, many levels, life is nothing but a series of relationships. That's what it is. There are relationships inside the family, to the extended family, to friends, to fellow students and workers and bosses and employees and neighbors. Life is a series of relationships. And relationships, if they're going to function well, require constant nurturing, don't they? A look, a word, a loving touch like we talked about last week. If relationships are going to grow, they require constant nurturing. And at least in my family, we need to be reminded of that constantly. Another thing that we as families need to be reminded of is that relationships can and do often break down. Right? Relationships often break down. And when that happens, hear this, the answer is not isolation. The answer is not accusation. The answer is not pouting. And the answer is not slander. No, the answer is communication. It's reconciliation. It is learning how to resolve conflict, which is exactly what Jesus is talking about in Matthew 5 and in Matthew 18. Look up those chapters later, Matthew 5 and Matthew 18. Now, I'm sure this probably never happened in your family. But growing up, I remember a number of times where I'd get in a fight with one of my brothers and sisters. It was always their fault, of course. And but when we would get that fight, we get our feelings hurt, right? And many times we would storm off to our rooms to pout, which, as you can imagine, went over like a lead balloon with my dad when he found out. And when he was found out, I don't know how he did it with the girls. I just know what he did with me. He would come bursting into my room and kind of paralyze me. And then he'd say, "Son, are you a part of this family?" "Yes, sir." "Do you want to continue to be a part of this family?" "Yes, sir." "Well, we don't have powders in this family. I know you're hurt. I understand that. But those feelings aren't going to go away by pouting. As a matter of fact, they're likely to get worse the longer you wait. And so get out of that bed, go downstairs, and make things right with your brother or your sister, and I mean now." And so as much as I hated it, especially if he would make us hug, I hated that. It's the truth. I put my tail between my legs, go downstairs, and I apologize to my brothers and sisters for my actions and attitudes. And friends, I really did hate that. But hear this, it taught me. It taught me that I could control my emotions. It taught me that I could work through the pouting. It taught me that I could actually begin the process of reconciliation even though I didn't feel like it. Friends, those are invaluable lessons for every single one of us who wants to have healthy relationships. A while back, I had a day off, and I don't know what was up. I mean, everything was completely out of whack with Deb. I'd like to tell you it was all Deb's fault, because it was not. The truth is, I really don't know what was going on, but we were at each other's throats all day long. You ever had one of those days? About 9, no, you're a better man than I. And finally, at 9:30 at night, all HE double toothpicks broke out. I was in her face, she was in my face. And finally, I just couldn't take it anymore, so I went stomping off the bed while two of my girls are looking on. When I get there, I lay in that bed and I'm brooding and I'm pouting for about 30 minutes. But as I lay there brooding and pouting, trying to find ways to justify my behavior, there were two voices that kept speaking in my head. Two voices. One was my dad's. This is no lie. They're speaking in my head. And I heard my dad say, "Derik, get up. We don't have powders in this family. I know you hurt. But those feelings aren't going to go away by pouting. So get up and make things right with Deb. And I instantly thought, he always has liked Deb better than me. I'm telling you, I'm having this conversation. That's no lie. The other voice that I heard was the voice of my Heavenly Father. I heard his voice. Through his word, I heard his voice say, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, and he gave himself up for her. And so finally, listening to those two voices, I got up and I went downstairs in front of the two girls that saw me stomp off to bed. Hear this, guys. If you blow it in front of your family, you need to make it right in front of your family. They need to see you do the right thing. And so in front of my girls, I went to Deb and I said, "Hon, I am sorry. The way I treated you was wrong. And I want to ask for your forgiveness." Friends, I am absolutely convinced that one of the most important values that you and I can instill in our family members is to work on relationships, to nurture them and reconcile them as quick as we can to the best of our ability whenever those relationships get broken. And to do that, hear this, to do that, it's going to take a lot of training, a lot of emphasis, and a lot of courage. But I, for one, think that's more than worthy of consideration as a dominant value in our families. The third value that I want to put before you for your family consideration is the value of character development. Character development. Friends, I don't know about you, but I truly am becoming increasingly uneasy with the success and performance values of our culture. I mean, children are being challenged to compete athletically and academically and artistically at earlier ages, and I'm concerned about the message that they're receiving. The message that says to win at all costs, whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. And friends, this is whatever it takes value that ought to concern each and every one of us. A sobering question for us to ask ourselves is this: who is it this day? Who is it in this day? Who is it that's reminding our families that it really does matter how you play the game? It really does matter how you play the game. Friends, who is it? Think about this. Who is this emphasizing to our families that who you are, speaking about your character, who you are is more important than how you look, or how high your test scores are, or how many goals or home runs or touchdowns you score? Friends, who is beating the character drum in America these days? Who is it? Is it the marketplace people? The television people? The Hollywood people? The Google people? The Instagram people? The Facebook people? Who is it? Or maybe it's the people who've already started battling for the highest governmental position in the land. Who's beating the character drum these days? Hear this. Character development is a primary function of the family. Do not point your finger anywhere else. It is a primary function of the family. And so families, it's up to you and me to beat the character drum. Now, of course, character development ought to be reinforced in the church, right? It ought to be reinforced in other places in society, but it is essentially a family function. Which is why the writer of Proverbs says in Proverbs 13:24, hear this: he who spares the rod, in other words, he who neglects the job of character development does what? The author says, hates his children. He hates his children. Why? Because, friends, if he truly loved them, he would be beating the character drum. He would be carefully disciplining his kids and teaching them the tough lessons of life. One summer when I was 11 or 12, we went on a family vacation to Lake Junaluska, North Carolina. Beautiful spot in the Smokies if you've never been there. We were camping, and at this particular campground, they had a game room with ping pong tables and pool tables and pop machines. And one day, my sister Sherry, who was 9 or 10 at the time, asked if she could go down to the game room and get a pop. And my dad said, sure. And so she went bouncing down, she's 9 or 10, bouncing down to the game room to get a pop. And as she walks in the door, she walks in on a couple of 12 and 13-year-old boys who are ripping off the pop machine. You see, evidently that machine had been broken, and you could put your money in, get a pop out, and then get your money back in as well. Pretty good deal, right? Well, Sherry is only 9 or 10. She really doesn't understand what's going on. But she knows enough that when these boys told her the pop machine is giving away free pops, and they asked her if she would want any, she knew enough to say, no, that would be stealing. I need to pay for it. But then the boys said to her, oh, no, you don't. No, you don't. It's okay. We'll buy it for you. And so they put their money in, and a pop came out. And they gave it to her. And, of course, they got their money out as well. And then she said, well, can I have one for my dad? Sure. Can I have one for my brother? Speaking about me. Sure. A few minutes later, she comes bouncing back to the camper with 3 pops, all excited to share these gifts that she's been given. And so everything is just wonderful. I actually get to touch one can for a brief second until Dad finds out how she got the pops. And when he finds out, he sits her down. He's very calm and patient with her. He says, honey, you may not fully understand this, but what you did was stealing. It was stealing. You took something that didn't belong to you without paying for it, and that's stealing. And so you're going to have to pay for it, and I want you to tell the manager what you did. And so together they went back to find the manager, and of course a couple of us kids were kind of trailing behind, and I was still hoping to get my pop. But when my sister and my dad found that manager, my dad said, honey, tell him what happened. And she did. She told him the whole story. When she was done, the manager looked into those great big brown eyes of my sister. They were always getting her out of trouble at that time. And then he looked at my dad and he said, it's okay. The machine's been doing that a lot lately. And my dad said, no, it's not okay. She needs to make it right. She needs to pay for it. And she did. She made it right and she paid for it. Friends, I can't tell you exactly how that impacted my sister, though I truly don't believe she ever stole anything ever again. I truly believe that. But I can tell you how it impacted me. First, I never got my pop. Second, most importantly, as I watched my sister walk with my dad and then talk to that manager, as I watched her reach in her pocket and make it right, that became a benchmark of character development in my life, a benchmark that I still go back to. Character building, character building, character building. Hear this, none of us want to do it. My dad didn't want to do it. He didn't want to make his little girl go back there and go through all that stuff, but he did. Why? Because he knew. He knew that if his little girl was going to grow up to be mature and responsible and a person of character and integrity, it had to be done. Friends, he who loves his child will carefully discipline them. They will beat the character drum. Abensenye is the oldest daughter of my brother Bill and his wife Missy. They have 8 kids. And she actually got married this past weekend down in Florida. When she was 4 years of age, just 4, Auburn was one of the cutest, most endearing, verbally gifted little girls that God's ever created. She really was. She was also very strong-willed and ornery. I feel for her husband. And so Bill and Missy were constantly having to beat the character drum on this little girl. And you know how it is. Many times you're wondering if it's actually doing any good at all. Well, one day they're watching a broadcast. Think about this, a 4-year-old is watching a broadcast. She went into political theory. With a political campaign, they're watching this broadcast. She's 4 years old, and one of the persons on TV says something about one of the other candidates as being a liar. She's 4 years old. She hears about this candidate being a liar. And she turns to her mommy with somewhat a confused look on her face. And she says, Mommy, why would anybody vote for a liar? 4 years old. Why would anybody vote for a liar? Great question, right? Friends, that little girl was beginning to understand the importance of character. Oh, that the little ones would teach us. And oh, how we need to be taught. Occasionally, I hear parents lying for their kids by writing notes to the school for illnesses that the kids don't have or homework assignments that they never did. Or worse yet, I occasionally hear parents pulling strings to get kids out of traffic tickets or other difficulties with authorities, or actually buying their kids' way into colleges. Friends, when I hear those kind of things, all I want to say to those parents is, parents, what are you doing? What are you doing? Are you even thinking about what you're teaching your kids? Sure, you think you're helping, right? But are you? Are you truly giving your kids what they need, what they truly need to be able to grow up and develop into the person of integrity and character God designed them to be? Are you really doing that? Friends, hear this. If you and I fail to do that, if you and I fail to beat the character drums in the lives of our kids, it will not only come back to haunt us, I promise you, but it will come back to haunt them, the very ones we think we're helping. And so if you really love your kids, if you really love them, communicate that honesty matters. Lies will not be tolerated. Courage is important. Fears must be faced. Loyalty is a virtue, and self-discipline is worth developing. Friends, if you and I are not beating the character drum in the lives of our kids, then there probably will be no one else in our society that's going to do it for us. Let me mention one more value before we close. The value of peak performance in worthwhile endeavors. The value of peak performance in worthwhile endeavors. It's the value that Paul talks about in Colossians 3:23, where he says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as unto the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as unto the Lord. Friends, again, we're living in a society that not only doesn't talk much about character development, but we're living in a society where old-fashioned values like commitment and devotion and dedication to anything, hear this, dedication to anything other than making money is often ridiculed as being fanatical. For example, husbands, tell your not yet Christian buddies or some guys at work that you're faithful to your wife and you plan to be until the very end. Tell them that you take her out regularly for date nights. Tell them that you're totally committed to helping your wife become all God intends her to be. And then watch the grins and the rolls of the eyes. And guys, when word gets out about what you said, you are a Brandon man. Or tell them you're so committed to serving your family, you have actually made a vow to stay home several nights a week. And that you vowed to do the best job you can, modeling godly values to your kids, no matter how old they get. And tell them, even though you have to pass up on some business deals and outside interest, you're going to do it anyway, and then watch how they respond. Tell them that you're irreversibly committed to the person and the cause of Jesus Christ. And you're committed to faithfully serve Him for the rest of your days. And if you do that, I promise you, you will be branded a fanatic 3 times over. Friends, in the twisted values of our world today, we're often taught that our best time and our best interests and our best efforts and our best emotions and our greatest service ought to all be heaped on the altar of work. And because of that, our service to God, our service to our spouses, our service to our kids, and our services to the ministry God's called us to often get nothing but leftovers. Leftovers. Hear me. I am not saying that you and I shouldn't approach our labors with a do your best attitude, because we should do our best. But I am saying this. You and I should be intentionally applying the same value to the people and the ministries that God has called us to. And we should be encouraging our families to do the same. As my girls were growing up, as they would come home from athletic events or musical performances, or they'd bring home their report cards, my first question was not and is not, did you win? Did you woo the audience? Did you bring home all A's? No, my first question was the very same question I believe that God will ask every single one of us as his children when we walk into heaven's gates. Did you do your best? Did you give it your all? Sometimes they would say yes. Sometimes they would say no. But hear this, I wanted them to know that their efforts that they gave for God and others were more important than any accolades that they would ever receive. Now hear this, we celebrated accolades. We did. But first, we look for the effort. Paul says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as unto the Lord. And family, we need to cheer one another on to help that happen. These 4 values that we talked about today, the spiritual value, the relational value, the character value, and the peak performance value, as I said earlier, those 4 values weren't intended to be in an exhaustive list. Instead, they were only meant to inspire your own list, to serve as an example of what I want to challenge every single one of you and your families to do this next week. I want to challenge you to sit down and to prayerfully think over and adopt for yourselves and for your family an essential value list. An essential value list. Start off by putting all the options on the table. All the dominant values that might make your top 5 or top 10 list. And then agree on them as a family. Put them down into writing and post them somewhere where every one of you can see them. Why? So you can hold one another accountable. So you can be reminded that these are some of the values that you are willing to go to the mat for. These are some of the marks that you want to intentionally leave in one another's lives. These are some of the primary ways that you want to strive to please God and to build one another up. Friends, if you will do that, your home will become a training center. A training center that will serve you and your family well. Let's pray. Lord, all week long I've been praying for those parents and those grandparents that never had a model. Never had a model in the earthly realm that really would be worth following. I've been praying for them, Lord, so that your word would speak to them. Lord, ultimately, you are the model. You are the example. And I pray that you would take each one of us deeper and deeper into your word and that we would see how you relate to us. And we'd begin to understand why you relate to us in some of the ways that you do, and that it all goes back to love. There is discipline, but discipline is used for correction to get us onto the right path, to help us become all that we're designed to be. Lord, I pray for each and every parent in this room, every future parent in this room, for every grandparent and great-grandparent in this room. Lord, as the Apostle Paul invited us to follow him as he follows Christ, I pray that we would go into your word and we would follow you. We would follow you as the great Heavenly Father, the one who loves us unconditionally, without restraint, extravagantly, that we would learn from you and that we would grow into the men, the women, the moms, the dads, the grandmas, the grandpas that you have always dreamed that we would be. Lord, we pray this all in your name. And all God's people said.